it's time. Gird your loins and buckle your cuckles.
It's interesting that you call me a propagandist, because I want to play you. This was your reaction to when the hospital got bombed.
I'm a propagandist.
I'm a propagandist. I'm just saying. I'm going to play you.
I'm saying I am.
Okay. Well, then I want to.
I'm saying I am.
I just
before
want to
you even play it.
Okay. I'm going to play the clip. This is your reaction.
I don't know if it's a good idea, like off the cuff, without any qualification or clarification, to refer to yourself as a propagandist. It's true, they're both propagandists, but you know.
To the bombing of the hospital the other night.
While I was in the process of getting ready for the stream, Israel enacted one of the singular
YouTube/Hasanabi Productions. Imagine getting the accreditation to your fan channel when cited on the big news video.
Worst strikes they have done thus far, and an Israeli airstrike hit the Al Ahli hospital in Gaza City.
What are they censoring in both of these corners? What are they censoring here? They're censoring Bernie here. What are they censoring here? His chat? Ah, yeah, chat.
City, where thousands of civilians were seeking medical treatment and shelter from the relentless bombing campaign.
Now, interestingly, when you were saying that, I was coming on air too. And I took a position based probably on 30 years of being a journalist, including running major newspapers, working at CNN and
Journalist.
others, of waiting, of just saying, I think we should just wait and see what has actually happened here, get clarification, see who's actually to blame before we start passing judgment.
This is always the Weasley verbal diarrhea of centrists. They never actually hold to it. People like this are free to make snap judgments whenever they feel they're right to, and then whenever the situation feels a little bit more murky, they pull back and act like the arbiters of caution. Like, news means covering news, you know? If you there is no objective threshold where you know for a fact that you have all the information necessary to make a determination. The literally, definitionally rational thing to do in any situation is acknowledge how much info you think you have in the situation, assess the evidence present at that time, and say, from the evidence present, this is what I think, but it can change in the future. And then in the future, you can adjust your belief based on existing and increasing evidence. That is the Greek scholar, Plato, Socrates, big brain, huge, giant Western tradition, logic, reason, Ben Shapiro way of doing things. The thing that bothers me is Israel has been caught lying so many times with regards to their treatment of the Palestinian people and the journalists and stuff, but I know for a fact that a lot of people would just go, oh, well, Israel said X, so that's the thing, you know? And then when there's more investigations done in the future or more evidence that comes up or whatever, then it's a scandalous little bit of drama or some weird, so whoa, who could have expected that? But maybe you could have, you know, by not believing the shit in the first place, but nobody treats it that way. It's like Schrodinger's caution, where you're only cautious about something when it's politically advantageous for you to be cautious about it.
You raced in to assume, as many people did, by the way, including the New York Times, BBC, mainstream media, and of course most of the Arab world then followed.
And Reuters, so everyone basically. So what he's saying is everyone assumed something based on the initial evidence, which is fine. That's also how evidence works.
That this was clearly, indisputably, an Israeli airstrike on this hospital. And yet all the evidence now suggests very strongly that it wasn't. That in fact, this was a rocket that misfired coming from a terrorist group.
And look at what he's doing now. See, now so this is what I mean by the Schrodinger's caution thing. Now, so with 1 day of evidence, you are irrationally making the assumption that Israel did it. But now with 2 days of evidence, now I'm super rationally, conclusively determining that actually, now that the existing evidence has skewed in my favor, my assumption that it's correct is extremely rational and reserved. And actually, I waited until all the facts arrived 2 days after the rocket hit. You know? Oh, you fools, you plebeians, you idiotically assumed that your information was conclusively determined, but now I factually know that mine is. It's so dumb. A lot of libs are being smug about this, trying to make it like a lefties bit when everyone f***ed up. Dude, Reuters said it was Israel, okay? It is the job of the news to proportion their claims to the evidence available, and that will mean retractions and changing stories, and loftily pretending like you're above that when you're just one day behind the curve is really stupid.
Inside Gaza. So my question for you is this. Why would you
I wouldn't go that far,
Why
Piers.
would you be so certain in what you said before you knew?
Why would you be so certain now after 2 days? Like, what? A whole bunch more evidence could come out tomorrow to be like, oh, actually, it turns out this and this and this. You know, we received internal communications from Israel that indicated that actually there was like a rocket fire. And the reason it didn't leave a big crater is because this and this and this. Like, do you understand? Does everyone understand what I'm trying to say here? That this standard of rationality is not actually rationality. It's like it's a falsehood. It's a double standard that doesn't actually apply rationality. It just lambasts people when they arrive at conclusions that you don't find convenient.
Okay. So, first and foremost, before we get started on this conversation, let's understand something very important here. There's no electricity in Gaza. Internet is patchy in Gaza. There's no food in Gaza. There's no water in Gaza. This is all by design. This is because Gaza...
I'd say it's wise to qualify statements we make on breaking news with little info available to make that clear. Yeah, I did. Most of the people that well, hold on. There were plenty of people on Twitter who didn't do that. But yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. If you're operating under the fog of war, you never know when you have all the evidence. Like, ever. It's not like you're going to get Colombo, an entire detective team out to every single bomb strike. Thousands of bombs and missiles are fired into Gaza. And like, we're going to get like an independent investigation team to go in there and like super ultra factually. And then we need a second investigation team to make sure the first one didn't have any bias. Like, obviously past a point, there is a level of like ambiguity we have to accept, because that's the case with literally all news. All news that we talk about as though it's factual actually operates within like a range of uncertainty that we just have to accept because we're not God. The problem that I have is when people pretend that one range of probable evidence is objectively incorrect and like rushing, is like irrational and you're rushing to conclusions, but then their range is super objective and like factually determinable. And actually, this is what reasonable people believe. But the next day over, you could have an even narrower range that limits the range of uncertainty even further. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe you were the one actually being hasty. It's stupid. We could do this with all news. This is Piers' point here, though, annoyingly. The clip he showed of Hasan sounding definitive. Yeah, but it's a single clip. Did Hasan ever say anything like, we don't know all the facts for sure? I mean, maybe he didn't. I don't have like a ton of faith in Hasan as a content creator. So, I would, to be clear, I'm not out here staking my entire reputation on Hasan's perceived credibility.
is under a brutal blockade, a brutal occupation by the Israeli government. Okay? So that plays a role in the fog of war and the misinformation that gets spread. Having said that, however, you made it seem as though there is a certainty that this was 100% not an Israeli airstrike.
No, I didn't. And instead, I literally just said it's not a certainty.
Okay.
Wait, what was this? Wait, hold on. This is 2 minutes 30 in. Hold on.
Indisputably, an Israeli airstrike or missile.
What does indisputably mean? What? No, he's quoting Hasan there. Oh, he's quoting Hasan? Okay, then what did he say about himself?
And yet all the evidence now suggests very strongly that it wasn't. That in fact this...
Okay, all the evidence now suggests very strongly. Okay, I will admit that is not determinative language. I would say, however, that without any caveats, it is still implying that you know what something is the truth. If you say all of the evidence points towards X, very strongly points towards X, that does imply that that is the thing that is true to most people in terms of, I guess I'd say like implication or like just in terms of how we use language, even though it doesn't explicitly say so, but it doesn't technically say that. Does that make sense?
Was a rocket that misfired coming from a terrorist group inside Gaza. So
okay, so yeah, I think you could say that he didn't technically do the like determinative statement thing there. This is so dumb, man.
Okay, sorry.
I said the evidence is increasingly pointing to this not being an Israeli airstrike. And that is expert evidence from people who...
Okay, so here's the question. Here's the question I'm curious about. If Hasan had said, like 3 hours after the hospital went boom, if Hasan had said, all the evidence right now very strongly points towards this being an Israeli rocket attack, I think he would have been correct in saying that. because at that point in time, with the little evidence that was available, that would be like a correct statement. Reuters was reporting that, like everyone on the ground was saying that, like all the evidence at the time was saying that. And then later, so if he had said that, if he had said the evidence at this moment strongly points to that, would Piers Morgan still have had a problem with what he said? My belief, because I hate Piers Morgan, is yes. I think that Piers Morgan's problem here is not with the hyper-specific delivery of like perceived certainty with any given news story, but rather, Hasan not being a Zionist cuck. However, that is why it's important to be careful with your language, something that I believe and have always done and have never misspoken or overstated the certainty of any case at any point ever on any issue. Thank you.
Who have no skin in the game at all.
Yes. Well, I don't know which expert you're talking about, because I think Channel 4 did a pretty good job. As a matter of fact, I would say Channel 4 did probably the best job so far in analyzing everything that the IDF has said. But the reason why I believed, and I still do believe, that the likelihood is that this was an Israeli bombing campaign wasn't only because of the singular verifiable video, the phone.
We've talked about this a lot. My current position is agnostic on whether it was a failed Hamas rocket or an Israeli explosive of some kind. We know for a fact that Israel lied a bunch of shit. We know for a fact now that Hamas has lied about shit. There's a lot of facts that don't add up. I don't really care that much because it seems like it's a conclusion that could only be arrived at if one had very specific knowledge on rocketry, like if one knew a lot on the subject, and I don't. My understanding of rocketry is pretty much limited to that which I had to apply in order to play War Thunder back when I was younger, which is that it goes big boom, and the boom can be different depending on the type of boom. And I didn't even get that far in that game, which is probably good because it's a terrible game, and it funds the Russian government when you be a whale for it. So what I'm more curious about is like the lying about the death count thing. New reports suggesting, not definitively yet, that the Gaza hospital attack was more consistent with the impact marks from an artillery shell fired by the Israelis. Really? Oh, from Mehdi Hasan, too. So reputable. Yeah, this is what I mean about, like, the cuckoldry of fake, ambivalent, centrist moderation. Where you will... So, like, again, it's like 0 days in. Wow, your conclusions are so hasty. They ended up being wrong 1 day in. My conclusions now have been arrived at following the full summation of the evidence at hand 2 days in. Well, actually, my conclusions are the real. Bro, just admit that you should adjust your beliefs in accordance with the evidence, and the evidence is ever shifting. Like, just be honest with the information you have at the whatever. Okay, yeah. I don't know. Did you see this funny meme about me arriving at conclusions quickly? Yeah, I love the meme, but in this case, it doesn't actually apply because I said with regards to the Israeli bombing that we don't know for sure, but the evidence at hand strongly points to it. This is what I mean by the cuckoldry of fake moderation and centrism, which is something I'd use to describe both this meme and the community it's from. It's irrational because it disingenuously assumes a greater degree of legitimacy to a range of uncertainty present when the conclusion looks like it leans towards them. And in the other direction, it's like, it's a very specific form of bad faith, actually, where your claims only need so much certainty in order to be justifiably worthy of advocacy, whereas the claims made by the opposition have to be held to a much higher standard. And that shifts back and forth, you see? Anyway, it's a waste of time. Honestly, I think that like conversations like this do very little other than to detract from the fact that there is a genocide that is taking place right now. Israel is doing genocide. I think genocide is bad. I think that it's important to deal with the sort of particular facts of the matter to some extent, but it's one of those missing the forest for the trees kind of deals, you know?
Video from the balcony that had all of the markings of an airstrike. The fact that the Israeli Air Force was enacting a bombing campaign in the region at the time, according to the Al Jazeera live streaming footage that everyone is using but doesn't understand. The fact that the digital media person for the IDF.
Do you think it's an issue of our news system being too cucked to issue corrections, and that Israel benefits from a staggered release of the truth by where the time the actual factual truth is released, people? This is the case with like all retractions. Yeah, this is just a big problem, not only with the news media, but with like media and human brains. The initial news is sensational. The retraction very rarely is. So it's very difficult. I actually think that live streaming is one of the few formats where this is less likely to be an issue, because live streaming is such a personalized format, and the way content is released means that if a streamer makes one claim and then makes a subsequent contradictory claim where they say the first claim was wrong, the second one can actually get just as much attention. Whereas with newspapers and like traditional media, the retraction or the correction will almost never get the same amount of attention. So this might actually be better here, assuming a live streamer actually, presents the new evidence. I could be wrong in that, but that's the impression I get, because I know that newspapers, like newspaper retractions, don't get shit, This is why Israel would manufacture lies to prove their innocence, even if they were innocent. Yeah, it's the same thing that Russia does, right? In a media environment where it's already difficult enough to discern truth from fiction, constructing and just like throwing out there a million lies a second means that not only does like nothing get retracted, but if something does get retracted, like you have sensational claim A, which is really easy to rally around, but then when you pick it apart, it's like, well, who's going to rally around picking apart a sensational claim, right? Far fewer people. It's not as likely. It's really man. The media is everything is it's impossible to find out what's true or not unless you watch me. Everything I say is true. All right, moving on.
Immediately came out and said that this was actually an airstrike that hit a Hamas target. And more importantly, I guess, the fact that this hospital had been bombed by Israel. This hospital had been bombed by Israel on Saturday. 22 hospitals have, as a matter of fact, been bombed by Israel since this last saga in the occupation. And this hospital had been bombed directly by Israel, where the cancer ward was destroyed. Israel has been bombed.
I think the easiest thing that he could say here would simply be to say, at the time that I spoke that, the evidence overwhelmingly seemed to point to Israel having done this, considering Israel's propensity for bombing hospitals, the size of the explosion, and everything that was said at the time, plus misinformation that was identified from the IDF. As time passes, more evidence becomes available, and the conclusions will change likewise. It could be that in a week, the evidence will look different, and you'll look the fool for stating confidently this, but so-and-so. That's probably the best direction to take things with this. This is one of the reasons why the dishonesty from Hamas about the death count really bothers me, because now anytime a large number of Palestinians die, there's going to be a million actualies where people are like, what happened the last time we trusted a death claim? I'm going to need 72 detectives, and I'm going to need live drone footage, and I need to see IDs of every person who has died. And then it's like, well, a lot of them don't have IDs. They're literally stateless people. They're not even given identification from the Israeli government. And it's like, that's why it's so, you got to be so careful with the misinfo here. I know that there's a huge temptation from Hamas or from whatever to sensationalize, to try to get people on their side. But a lot of the people in the world already are on their side.
All of these hospitals. Israel's been calling all of these hospitals to evacuate over and over and over again. The medical professionals at the hospital had been called by the Israeli government the day prior, and everyone on the ground assumes that this is an Israeli airstrike. They are the ones who experienced the situation.
Hassan,
so when you have
but the truth is,
can I just finish this?
If you watch the BBC account of all this last night, by their Verify unit, which was specifically set up by the BBC to be completely dispassionate in these investigations.
Oh, that's good. Oh, I'm glad. The BBC has always demonstrated total impartiality with regards to the Israeli-Palestine issue. So I trust them, unequivocally.
And they reached a pretty clear conclusion based on circumstantial evidence, I'll make that clear, that this would not have been an Israeli airstrike, including, for example, the size of the crater, which bears no relation to the size of craters normally left by Israeli air. So, look, my point is, neither of us know for sure.
That is true. But again, it's worth pointing out, none of us know anything for sure. There are very few things that are reported on that could be claimed to be objectively true. Almost always, it's like an independent source verified, or a conclusion has been arrived at very clearly. Usually, the only times you know for sure if something is true is if you're reporting on something that the person who you're reporting on wants you to know about them, and they've just said it. They're just saying this, X person said Y. Okay, well, we have a video of that. That's probably true. Though, f it, these days with deepfakes and stuff, who knows how long that's going to be the case, Shit's getting dicey out there. The only point I'm making here is this is a very postmodern take on the news or whatever, but everything, or I guess at least almost everything, is delivered to us within a probability range Very rarely do we know what the truth actually is. Historians know this. When we talk about history, we make a lot of decisions about what information to include and what not to include. And a lot of what we know about history is literally us just taking like a guy or two's word for it. We question the reliability of information that we have multiple witness accounts on today, but we take entire like eras of history more or less entirely from single historians, even as far back as like early American history. A lot of what we know about the founding fathers is derived from like, oh yeah, this group of like old white dudes said he was cool, and like they said this about him, and they said this party happened, and like, yeah, okay, that is just false. No, it's true. Shut up. I've talked to historians. Yes, it is. A huge amount of history is like you do your best to take what you can and learn what you can, but at the end of the day, oftentimes you really don't have that much info to go off of. Certainly not compared to the kinds of evidence that we use today when it comes to finding out what is or isn't true. So none of this is to say, oh, whatever, just go lie. It doesn't even matter. It's to say, understand that it takes a lot of effort to even get a low probability range on any source. Like it can be really, 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 really difficult just to get that. So just keep in mind, it's really difficult to talk about stuff that has or hasn't happened.
But you took to your airwaves immediately because actually I wouldn't even say unconscious bias, your admitted propagandist bias on your part was that you wanted that.
Everyone did. All news organizations immediately said, there has been a bombing at the hospital. Many of them said it seems to be an Israeli bombing. That's what news is. Yeah, you talk about the news. That's how news is, yeah.
To be an Israeli airstrike, it suited your narrative. And I would say that in itself, in its way,
wanted it to be
is being a stenographer.
Well,
you accuse me of being a stenographer. I try and be fair and get to the truth. In your case, I don't think you try to do that.
I agree that you shouldn't call yourself a propagandist for like just without like any explanation. I think it would have been a lot better if Hasan had said, we're both propagandists, we both have biases, we both have a narrative, we try our best to account for it, but that's just it, right? Because that would be true. He did. He kind of said, I am a propagandist like 5 times in a row. It sounded a bit different. But yeah, I get that.
I think you appeal to your audience, appeal to your base, and you don't really care whether the facts are there or not.
This is entirely unfair because you just said circumstantial evidence favors that this was not an Israeli airstrike.
Yeah.
I gave you all of the circumstantial evidence that it does favor that this is an Israeli airstrike. The reason why, however, circumstantial evidence is not enough. And the one thing that I will concede to, because when more information did come out, and no, I do not mean when Israel said that they did not bomb this hospital and it was actually Hamas, and then they turned around and went, never mind, it's not Hamas, it's actually Islamic Jihad. And then they said...
Another thing, another interesting point with regards to the nature of truth and how to present it is that it is not at all uncommon, even in like rigorous disciplines, to have people who have edge case opinions on certain issues. A good example of this would be, say, economics, right? Where you'll have economic phenomena where the majority of economists have a certain opinion on it, and then you'll have some people who will say, no, I have this different opinion. Historians, the same. Yeah, there will be historians who are like, no, actually, I don't think this event happened the way people think it did. This is my opinion on it. This is the case in essentially all forms of information sharing, And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes a person with an edge case opinion can advocate for it strongly enough and over a long enough period of time that they're able to mount a growing body of evidence, and that minority opinion ends up becoming the majority opinion. A good example of this would be physics, for example. Obviously, like the one go-to example everyone goes to is like, well, Newtonian physics was what we operated on for a long time, but then, whoa, take a look at this. Now we have like relativistic physics. We have like Einstein shit, And it's like, whoa, okay, hold on. At first it's a minority opinion, but then more and more arguments are made, and eventually that ends up becoming the majority opinion. Now basically everyone believes it. I mean, everyone in the field, at least. Darwin with evolution, Mathematics. Every field has instances where a minority opinion is pushed and advocated for as the evidence builds, and eventually it becomes the majority opinion. Now, obviously, the vast majority of the times a minority opinion is advocated for, it does not overtake the majority opinion. People will always do this like, well, people used to think Newtonian physics was correct by pretending that like their flat earth theory is going to overtake round earth theory or whatever. Yeah, or like Lysenkoism is going to take over normal genetics or whatever. Like, so the vast majority of the time, the alternative theory does not replace the dominant one. I do think that it's worth noting, however, that when it comes to news, it's okay to say, I think the majority of evidence points in this direction, but I think there's more evidence than is acknowledged in this direction. After all, the weight of evidence is a subjective process of analysis. For example, say you have 5 pieces of evidence that point towards it being a Hamas or Islamic Jihad misfire, and 3 pieces of evidence that point towards it being an Israeli strike. Depending on the strength of the evidence, it's possible that the 3 pieces of evidence for it being an Israeli strike could actually overwhelm the 5 pieces of evidence that indicate that it's a Hamas rocket failure. It really depends on, well, a subjective assessment of the value of the evidence. I know that I'm rambling right now, but does anyone here like does anyone care or understand what I'm trying to get at here? Because what I'm talking about essentially is like the theory of truth relative to journalism, the theory of truth and how to be truthful as it applies to journalistic reporting. And this is not a subject in which I have a degree. I mean, there are people who know far more about it than me, but what I do know is that it's complicated. And I know there are plenty of times where, for example, the mainstream narrative has ended up being like really weak and faltering, or you'll have decades and decades of a mainstream narrative being like obviously fake, and everyone knows that it's fake if they have any knowledge of the subject, but it doesn't get like accepted as fake for a long time. Good example of that would be trickle-down economics, where economists have never believed that shit, but a lot of Americans have because Reagan lied to them. With regards to this specifically, I think that the preponderance of evidence right now seems to make it look as though Islamic Jihad was responsible for the explosion and not Israel. But I don't know how it's going to shift in the future. I just can't stand the fake, disingenuous, like, my burden of evidence is better than your burden of evidence bullshit. Piers Morgan is essentially trying to, through Hamas, not through Hamas, sorry, through Hasan, the famous Hamas supporter, by proxy, attack Palestinian supporters as being unfair to Israel. The narrative that Piers Morgan wants to defend here is the idea that the media, and left media especially, is deeply unfair to Israel, when in reality, media has been deeply unfair to Hamas for basically all time. Again, don't miss the forest for the trees. Vosh is trying so hard to tap dance around the words, I was wrong about the hospital, it's okay, we understand. This is exactly what I mean about the cuckoldry. There's nothing in those videos that I disagree with now in retrospect. The problem with you, and I guess Piers Morgan as well, is that rather than seeking truth, you're seeking gotchas. You know, you're operating on the reality television level of like news engagement, and in that respect are fundamentally no different from like the Twitter lefties who will continue to believe without any doubt that it was Israel that did this without ever like re-examining their beliefs, because it's only about trying to confirm your priors. You meant unfair to Palestine, not Hamas, right? I just talked for like 20 minutes straight. I probably misspoke like 70 times. Just change around whatever words you need to make what I said make sense.
We have more evidence coming out in a couple hours. And then the evidence came out, and it turns out it sounded like the phone conversations that they were able to intercept, supposedly, sounded like...
do a Mad Libs of all of my segments and just rearrange it until you've arrived at the most charitable interpretation of what I have to say.
Experts, at the very least, to be completely false and completely made up.
Yeah, but Hasan, I don't think... Listen, in all honesty, I don't think, even as you're saying all this, I think you're a smart guy.
Piers, let me finish.
I think you've looked at all of this, and I think in your heart, you know this was probably not an Israeli airstrike. And I...
What? Deep down in your soul. What?
I'm just curious why you would, instead of admitting that as facts change,
that is
your
not what
opinion
I'm saying. That is not what I'm saying at all.
I don't understand why you would double and treble down when the evidence is pointing the other way.
You're asking me to be on your show. Do you want to talk?
Yes.
If you're asking me to be on your show, and I want to be on the show, thank you.
Such a stupidly sanctimonious thing to say. Didn't Hasan literally just say that like the evidence changes with time? If the central like complaint here is you spoke with unwarranted confidence right from the get-go, rather than saying like, oh, things might change with time, as I did smartly because I'm big brain smart, thank you. If that's the complaint, Hasan just said like, well, evidence changes with time. So he's acknowledged the concept of conclusions changing with evidence. What more are we talking about then? Like, what now is the thing that we're talking about?
Thank you so much for having me on your show. let me explain exactly what I said, and let me explain to you why I think still, to this very moment, until there is a third-party investigation that is concluded by the UN, the International Criminal Court, or specifically a forensic analyst that looks at the situation, is allowed to be on the ground. This is not just my perspective. This is Betsy.
I think Piers thinks Hasan knowingly lied instead of making a mistake. Anyone who thinks that you would need to be a knowing liar in order to assume Israel was at fault when a hospital got bombed in the Israel hospital bomb zone is acting in bad faith. The idea that your snap judgment in such a situation would be, oh yeah, Israel, you mean Israel, the country that likes to bomb hospitals, bombed 22 hospitals, said they're going to bomb more hospitals, warn the hospitals they're going to bomb them, and has missiles for bombing a hospital. A hospital got bombed? Might have been Israel. Anyone who thinks that thought process is knowing dishonesty is like completely cooked. They're their own propagandist now, you know? They're in their own head.
Selim as well, which is an Israeli organization that has also demanded a third-party investigation occur. I am not.
When we talk about Hasan's shirt, not gonna lie, he looks better than you here. Thanks, you boy Koiming. Isn't this is this a pearl snap button? This is a pearl snap shirt. It's got the two front buttons, and this looks like the pearl snap. I should get like a nice pearl snap shirt that's not 50 years old. The problem is that if you look up Google Images, if you just try to like look up an example of these shirts, you either get I like to get wasted at Mexican dive bars, or you get I am the biggest cowboy LARPer in the history of the United States of America. I live in Santa Cruz and I wear a cowboy hat to work doing data crunching every day. Like those are the two genders that you find when you search pearl snaps. Fast fashion. Dudes, okay, I have some advice. Never get into fashion. I've gotten into fashion. I know a lot more than I used to. And now whenever I look at a cheap shirt, I can feel like the flashbang noise in the back of my head. I can hear it. Look at this. I used to be able to look at something like this and think like, wow, that's a nice looking shirt. And now I think, man, if I was the photographer who had to like set this guy up and take the picture, I would kill myself, you know? Holy shit. Now I look at this and think like, holy, Jesus Christ. I see nothing wrong. Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. There was a quote that I learned that applies to artists that I'm really fond of, that I've always thought about it ever since first hearing it. And it was like, to a man with discerning taste, the greatest obstacle he must overcome in his pursuit of artistic talent is his own taste. Meaning, if you have good opinions on art, you will be reflexively critical of your own art because you're not good enough to do well yet, and you will know it. So being immediately taken aback by your own art might actually be a good sign, because it means that you're discerning enough to be able to improve, and you have to work through that. What are we doing? This is so meandering.
I am not going to conclusively say that this was not
I don't
Israel's
expect you to.
fault.
This is a complete waste of time. This whole thing was literally like the one claim that Piers Morgan had to make was, hey, you spoke with unwarranted confidence right as the event happened, along with all other media, including, again, like Reuters, you know? So that's it. Like, hey, Hasan, you did the thing that all the other news did. How do you feel? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Total waste of time. Oh, this was the full video. I don't want to risk it watching the full video. I feel like I effectively I fair used myself enough with rambling for like 20 hours on that one. I think we're good. Okay. It gets good at the end. Okay, fine. We can watch the end. We'll watch the end.
Well, I would say to that I think the death of any child in this conflict is horrific. Listen,
And that
Wow, what a brave take.
violence is frustrating people.
I hear
that
you.
violence
I
is
hear you.
radicalizing people.
But here's
Hold
my-
on.
I hear
as
you.
far as Israel, as far as what Benjamin Netanyahu has done, as far as the war government, what they have done, Piers, going into Gaza and bombing Gaza and
I wish you were more like XQC, Vosh. Yeah, let me just put up the whole interview and then take a giant shit.
killing 3,480 Palestinians so far in Gaza, 1,000 plus children out of all of those casualties, 22 hospitals being bombed, a bakery, the only remaining intact bakery being bombed yesterday. These are horrifying crimes that you would openly say are horrifying and unjustifiable when Russia does it, but when Israel does it, Israel has a right to defend itself. This is identical to the same talking points that
Okay, so far so good. How will Piers Morgan respond to this?
I've heard from every Israeli administration official. It's the same talking points that I've heard from American politicians championing the exact same talking points. It's the same thing that I've heard from everyone else in the media. You might have been against the Iraq war, and you use that, but you're using that for evil, in my opinion, at this point. If you are not sitting here and condemning those acts of war crimes, those acts of violence, those acts of collective punishment.
Well, I would say to that I think the death of any child in this conflict is horrific.
What a miserable, wretched coward. What a disgusting, demonic piece of shit. What an overtly disingenuous way of completely avoiding the point. Hey, you will aggressively condemn Hamas terror killings, but Israel has killed far more innocent people, and you would not say it. He's like, I think that all babies dying is bad. If he actually believed that, that's what he would have said when Hamas attacked on October 7th. He would have said, oh yeah, I think it's always bad when children die. Because what a Weasley liar.
Absolutely horrific. But the question comes down to me that after an act of terror, as we saw on October the 7th, Israel should be able to defend itself and should be able to go after the people that perpetrate.
So yeah, he just did it. He just with no self-awareness, just fully. Hasan is like, you have a double standard here, and you will wipe away that double standard by saying Israel has a right to defend itself. And then he says, well, I think all kids dying is bad. Also, Israel has a right to defend itself. Like, yeah, just what a demon. Shameless.
Who live amongst civilians in Gaza deliberately. And the question for me becomes down to what is proportionate. I don't know the answer, Hasan. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what that answer is.
I do know that.
Wow, what's incredible. Well, he certainly knows when it's disproportionate when Hamas attacks Israeli civilians. For some strange reason, he has a very strong, clear-minded idea of what disproportionate retaliation is when Hamas kills innocent civilians. But when Israel kills significantly more innocent civilians, he's like, well, I don't really know. I mean, it's really complicated. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Answer to that. I do know the answer to that. Last night I had Dr. Ofer Kassif, an Israeli Knesset member who was expelled, suspended for 45 days for saying what I believe is the truth. Championing the exact same position of the Haaretz's editorial board. There are a lot of thoughtful people, a lot of formative Holocaust scholars, a lot of historians that all agree on the same point. The reason why violence that even penetrates through the Israeli security blanket that people thought existed, that penetrated through that Iron Dome, the Iron Wall, if you want to call it that, is because of years and years of oppression and years of violence, which is a necessity.
I don't think that Hasan is doing a very good point of making his point here, or a very good job of making his point here. I think that he's waffling a little here. Maybe he'll bring it in.
To maintain an apartheid state, and this has to stop. There's only two ways out of this. Either you engage in full-blown ethnic cleansing, and if you listen to the likes of Smotrich, or if you listen to the likes of...
Why does he make a distinction between a wall and a dome? Because they're different things. The wall he's referring to is the Israeli security fence. It's not technically a border. The dome is the Iron Dome, which is a mobile missile or anti-missile defense system maintained by a ton of, supposedly, trucks, right? That are meant to track and intercept rockets that come out of Gaza.
Itamar Ben-Gvir and these very unfavorable, unpopular, far-right figures, if you listen to Netanyahu and his Likud government, they say that they are interested in going in that direction, the ethnic cleansing direction, the ethnic displacement direction, or the only way out of this for a real solution is to move towards peace.
When he talks about what violence is proportional in that context, isn't he just kind of doing what the collective punishment thing and saying one group is a justification to punish the other? Yes, he is. That's exactly what he's doing. Because he would never refer to what Hamas did as disproportionate retribution. He would just refer to it as a terrorist act. When Israel, kills thousands of innocent Palestinians, it's a question of proportion. Oh, is it too much? Is it not enough? I don't know. But no such question is asked when Hamas kills innocent people. When Hamas kills innocent people, even a single innocent person, it is unequivocally, objectively, easily determined to be terrorism. So this is the double standard present here. And it's because Piers Morgan is a ghoul. He's a demon. He's a piece of shit. You know, he's subhuman. He's British. He's terrible. He's bad in ascending order of badness at the end there.
To genuinely end the blockade, to end the apartheid, to end the occupation, and create a pathway towards citizenship for all people with a right to return, for all 14 million Palestinians, 5 million of which live under Israeli occupation. It's brutal. And then the rest living in diaspora. These are not unreasonable requests. These are requests that understand the dignity and the humanity of one side and does not simply treat them as their colonial subjects.
Hasan,
and it's the only way to create permanent security and prosperity in the region.
If
Never
it was
stop
as simple
talking.
as that, I'm sure that would have happened already.
Yeah, I think that he could have done a better job responding at the end here. I think that this was a pretty weak final point to go out on because he didn't directly address the hypocrisy inherent to Piers Morgan's juxtaposition. I think Pierce's assertion is that Hamas was explicitly targeting civilians and the IDF is explicitly targeting Hamas, which is bullshit. The IDF willfully, knowingly kills civilians all the time. The idea that the IDF actually does only target Hamas infrastructure is the most transparent and obvious lie imaginable. It's a joke. It's funny to hear that, you know? It is completely unsupported by any analysis of their actions, you know? It's ridiculous. The differences in this case between Hamas and the IDF is that the IDF kill more innocent people and they're more dishonest about their intentions. At least Hamas admits they're genocidal. If you ask Hamas, oh, river to the sea kill Jews, Hamas is like, yeah, we fucking hate Jews. You ask the IDF and they're like, no, we don't want to do genocide. What are you talking about? No, what are you talking about? Come on. We only target Hamas military infrastructure. Come on.
I would say this. I agree with a lot of what you've just said. Not all of it, a lot of it. I don't think you can ever achieve peace now with Hamas controlling Gaza. I don't think you can achieve peace with Netanyahu in charge of...
This is such a dishonest point. It's real. No, it's not. Nothing that I just said was a joke. I mean, I framed it as a joke. I expressed it comedically, but I think that the long-standing project of the IDF and of Israel's government has been one of eradication of the Palestinian people. If you want to prove otherwise, why is that where everything leads? Take more land, kill more people, take more rights. Where does it end? Like, the consequence of continuing the path we're on right now is the eradication of the Palestinian people, either by killing them or taking so much of their land that they have no choice but to flee, never again to return. Because again, Israel allows right to return for people whose bloodline may have possibly 4,000 years ago meant they might have been vaguely here. But Palestinians who were ousted from their houses 30 years ago, no right to return for them. They can't return. Sorry, better wait 4,000 years, before your right to return is legitimate, I guess. Totally psychotic, just absolutely psychotic.
Israel, actually, after this. I don't think his own people will want him to be in charge of Israel down the line when they examine exactly how this...
Isn't the birthright also for anyone who converts to Judaism? Yeah, which fucks up the birthright thing even more, because you can have a couple in Brooklyn where the dad gets converted to Judaism from the wife. You ask the rabbi 3 times, and it's like, oh yeah, we have no room in our country for the Palestinian families we illegally ousted from the West Bank. But for you, John Dickens from Brooklyn, with your Polish-Irish ancestry, you this is your homeland. Oh, don't even get me started on how Israel treats actual black Jews, by the way. Look, I'm not getting into it right now, but if you want to take a look at the history of colorism in the right to return and in Israel's policies towards immigration of Jews, not all Jews are white or whitish, okay? There are lots of Jews that are a lot darker, and Israel is really racist, in spite of the fact that Moses definitely would have been darker than the average Israeli is now. Right? They would have had to be. It was sunny out there.
This happened, but we will see. But Hasan, I've got to leave it there. Look, it's good to talk to you. You're an important, influential voice to a lot.
Don't they sterilize Ethiopian Jews? I think they did. Do they still do? Yeah, Israel gave birth control to Ethiopian Jews without their consent. Yeah, they don't want any dark people in their glorious Jewish theocratic ethno-state. Israel has admitted for the first time they've been giving Ethiopian Jewish immigrants birth control injections, often without their knowledge or consent, in an attempt to discover why birth rates in the community had fallen dramatically. So just so you guys know, okay, this is some proper 19th century eugenics shit. Guys, this news article is from 2013, okay? This news article came out after BioShock Infinite, and only now do they officially order gynecologists to stop administering these drugs. The big lie, involuntary sterilization of black Ethiopian women. Yeah. From 1977 to 1991, Israel rescued thousands of black Ethiopian Jews, resettled them in Israel. More immigrated to Israel in the 2000s. They were granted citizenship to integrate into Israeli society. In the late 2000s, reports appeared in the Israeli media that claimed that injections of Depo-Provera, a long-acting contraceptive, had been forced on hundreds of female Ethiopian immigrants. Israel haters who say that Israel tricked black Ethiopian women into being sterilized are widely wrong. Wait, hold on. This is an opposition article. Wait, is this an op-ed? Please note the posts on the blogs are contributed by third parties. Who linked a Zionist blog post to counter the claims made by independent.co.uk? This could literally just be written by anyone. The Israel haters, yeah. I wanted to show how bad it was from Israeli media. Oh, okay, yeah, that tracks. Nearly 100,000 Ethiopian Jews have moved to Israel under the law of return since the 1980s, but their Jewishness has been questioned by some rabbis. Last year, Benjamin Netanyahu, who also holds the health portfolio, warned that illegal immigrants from Africa, quote, threaten our existence as a Jewish and democratic state. Haaretz published an extract from a letter sent by the Ministry of Health to units administering the drug. Doctors were told, quote, not to renew prescriptions for Depo-Provera for women of Ethiopian origin if for any reason there was concern they might not understand the ramifications of the treatment.
Of people. And I think we have a lot of common ground, and there are some things that we disagree about, but I suspect it's not as much as you think. You know, I do think that the core problem here has got to get resolved in a way that's been completely ignored for decades. And until it gets resolved, until the plight of the Palestinian people is resolved, until all...
All right, yeah, that's enough. That's enough wiffle waffling. Get him out of here. I don't care. All right, I had a hearty breakfast. I had a bagel. I don't need any waffles.